as you know, or maybe you don't know, but I'm telling you now, I just got back from 2 weeks in California, sunny California, and thank God I'm back, right? Now I get to be on vacation for 10 hours on a plane with 4 little kids, not exactly a vacation. I got stuck, and as a mishigas along to do. There were some high points, many high points on my vacation, one of which was hiking. Of all places in Los Angeles, those of you who know LA, the Santa Monica Mountains right in the middle are unbelievable and beautiful. And my family, at least Ariel and I, love to hike. And so we all went as a family. And I read these supposedly true complaints given to the forest rangers across the country. They put them on their trailhead entry bulletin board. You can't make this stuff up, so they must be true. These are complaints people registered. Number 1, a small deer came into my camp last night, stole my bag of pickles. Is there any way I can get reimbursed? Number 2, escalators would help on steep uphill sections. Number 3, trails need to be wider so people can walk holding hands. That's actually sweet. I think of Ralph and Harriet on that one. Number 4, I found a smoldering cigarette left by a horse. I have no idea what that means. Number 5, trails need to be reconstructed. Please avoid building trails that go uphill. Number 6, there are too many bugs and leeches and spiders and spider webs. Please spray the wilderness to rid the area of these pests. Number 7, chairlifts need to be in some places so that we can get to wonderful views without having to hike to them. Number 8, the coyotes made too much noise last night and kept me awake. Please eradicate these annoying animals. Number 9, we need more signs to keep the area pristine. Number 10, a McDonald's would be nice at the trailhead. Number 11, there are too many rocks on the mountains. And number 12, the places where trails do not exist are not well marked. Some of these are like Zen koans. So you have to process them. I'm going to add to it just one of my own, not my own, my kids' own. Why can't we bring our new Hanukkah present, the Nintendo DS, right, the gaming thing, with us on the hike? I don't understand why we can't do it. Why can't we walk and do technology? Because they see other people doing it. When we were hiking, I saw no less than 3, 4, 5 people on the cell phone, climbing up a mountain, hanging off the cliff, trying to get reception. I kid you not. Right? My kids, they're like everybody else. They wanted to bring it. I had to confiscate the contraband because I just couldn't walk and hike and use technology at the same time. It's actually so bad. We go camping every summer. Last summer, I had to go to the next campsite over and ask them to turn down their television set. This is the world we live in. I felt like my grandfather, nothing against grandfathers, Ralph, others, I hope to be one someday. I felt like my grandfather on this hike when I turned to my kids and says, but when I was your age, right, when I was your age, we didn't have the DS. We had that little Coleco game with those little lines, right? It was a horrible reality. And even if you had a little Coleco game, handheld game, there wasn't Wi-Fi access and 3G or 4G networks and connected all day, every day. It's not the world any of us grew up in, if you're over a certain age. And I think about an article I read a couple weeks ago. I reposted it on my blog from the New York Times. It's a great article. Go to the New York Times on my blog to read it. The Joy of Quiet by Pico Iyer. Pico Iyer was invited with some other experts to go to Singapore to be a part of a conference called Marketing to the Child of Tomorrow. And he and Malcolm Gladwell and Mark Echo, really well-known names, were invited. And you would think that marketing for the child of tomorrow would be about more technology, innovative stuff, things to do. But in fact, what he talks about in his article is the child of tomorrow, we're going to have to market to them quiet and solitude, and not doing, but being. It's going to have to be taught or retaught to our children and our children's children. Why? Because the average American today watches how many hours of television? 4 hours and 34 minutes of television, up 10 minutes basically every year. Right? That means some poor schlep is watching 9 hours because Ralph and some others in here are watching none. Right? So some people are watching half a day, an entire day of television. Right? There's a real problem with that. The average American spends 9 hours in front of some type of a screen. Computer screen, iPod screen, iPad screen. By the way, I'm in this with you. But it's a real problem. It is a real challenge. Do you know how many text messages the average American teenager sends a year? Guess. Over 25,000. 75 a day is the average for teenagers. 75 a day, over 2,000 a week. No, that's not right. My math is terrible. But whatever it is, it's a lot, right? That's why I'm a rabbi, not an accountant. I need an accountant. So, seriously though, we have a real problem on our hands. We have to take seriously the words of Marshall McLuhan, who wrote 50 years ago. He's a media expert. I'm sure many of you know of him. He coined the phrase, the medium is the message. He wrote, just briefly, when things come at you very fast, naturally, you lose touch with yourself. When things come at you very fast, naturally, we lose touch with ourselves. It's impossible to stay connected, to stay grounded, to stay centered in a world that is becoming so chaotic and frenzied, and we're being bombarded all the time. And I see this in my own personal life. This is not judgmental. This is for all of us. I see this in the people I guide, and in my kids, and in my family, and in my community, and in the world, that we are losing the inability to remain quiet, right? The words of the famous scientist and mathematician Blaise Pascal. I have discovered that all the unhappiness of a man or a woman arises from one single fact: the inability to sit alone in one's own room, right? The inability to sit by oneself, to be comfortable with one's thoughts, to stop thinking, to stop the noise. Or in the words of the poet Uriah Mountain Dreamer. I love that name. Should have been Baruch Mountain Dreamer. I would have liked that better. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments, right? Do you like the company you keep when the iPad is off, and when the iPod is off, and when the iPhone is off, and if you have a BlackBerry, when the BlackBerry is off, whatever the technological device, do you like the company you keep? Are you able to keep that company? Are we able to sit silently, as Pascal said, in our own inner chamber? It is a growing problem. It is probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges we face today. And then I turn to the Torah portion, and I look at Joseph. Today we end Joseph's journey. We began it a couple weeks ago, right when I left to California, so it's fair game for me to talk about. And I want to talk about Joseph, because Joseph didn't have an iPhone. Joseph didn't have a MacBook. Maybe he had a Dell, but that's like, big deal. Yeah, having nothing. Sorry, I'm a Mac zealot. And he didn't have technology. He didn't have Wi-Fi access. And you know what? Even Joseph had a problem being alone. It's not a new problem. This is not a technology problem. It's not a 21st century problem. This is a human problem. Look at Joseph at the beginning of his journey. Look at all of the great figures at the beginning of their journey, or in the middle or at the end of their journey. They struggle with being alone. What was said to Adam? Lo tov heo to Adam levado. It is not good for a person to be lonely. Not alone, lonely, because most of us in our aloneness become lonely, and loneliness is not good. Loneliness is not constructive, it's destructive. What's the worst punishment you can get in the Bible, in the Torah? What's the worst punishment that could be meted out? Not capital punishment, karet, excommunication, to be kicked out of the tribe, to be sent out into the desert alone. That was the ultimate punishment. Remember Cain, what was his punishment by God? To be a na-venad, a ceaseless wanderer, a ceaseless journeyer on his own. Even if he's with other people, his curse was that he would always be lonely. That is a curse. That is something that we have to be able to deal with, to face, to overcome our loneliness. And that is what Joseph did. So how do you overcome loneliness? How did Joseph overcome loneliness? It's very interesting to watch this young man. Because at the beginning of his journey, what is he? An annoying teenager. Nothing against teenagers. I was one. You were one. But he was an annoying teenager. Why? He was his father's favorite. He had that coat of many colors. He had a gift of dream divination. And he talked about it. And he lorded it over his brothers. And he nagged them about it. And he followed them around and wouldn't cease, wouldn't let them go. There's a manic nature about Joseph at the beginning. He's filled with some sort of anxiety that he just can't be alone. If he just would have left his brothers alone instead of following after them to continue to bother them, maybe they wouldn't have done what they did. What did they do? They threw him into the pit. Doesn't justify what they did, attempted murder, but nonetheless, right, it's a little bit understandable that this young man was in some ways asking for it. So what happens to the brothers? They have a falling out, and where does Joseph go? Into the pit, where he is alone, probably for the first time in his life. And then where does he go from the pit? He goes down to the dungeons, the prisons of Egypt, where he's alone once again. And then he's forgotten by the butler or the baker, candlestick maker, whatever it is. And he's forgotten by them down in the dungeons of Egypt, and then he's still alone. And then he rises in power, right? And now he's second in power of all of Egypt, and yet he's still alone. He's the only Jew down there, and something of his identity is being lost. His dress is like the Egyptians, his walk, his talk is like the Egyptians. He is alone, and yet in the process, Joseph learns how to deal with his loneliness. And we see it. It's an amazing moment when we realize that Joseph has finally grown up. He's been able to sit in the pit or the prison or in his position in Egypt alone and no longer be lonely, right? And we see it in that moment when his brothers come down last week and they're reunited. And for the first time in his life, he recognizes who he is and he's okay with himself. After all that time alone, what does he say? Ani Yosef achichem. I am Joseph. I am Joseph. I am Joseph, your brother. I have a sense of self again. I've returned to myself. To be self-centered isn't bad. To be selfish is a problem. To be self-centered, to center yourself, to have a self is important if you're going to be in a relationship with somebody else. If you don't have a sense of self, we can't be fully in relationship. A bride and a groom like Ralph and Harriet standing under the chuppah should not be two halves coming together to make a whole. There should be two wholes coming together to make something greater than the sum of their parts, right? So we should be a self and we should have a center to ourself. And sometimes you can only find yourself in the quiet, in the solitude of life. The prophet Isaiah said it best. For thus says Adonai Eloheinu, the Holy One of Israel, in ease and in rest shall you triumph. In quietness and in confidence you shall find strength. Right? In quietness you will find confidence. You will find strength. You will be able to sit by yourself in the quiet, in the solitude, and you will start to like the company you meet. And from a Jewish mystical perspective, that's where we find God. We don't just find God at the shul while we're davening with the words. We don't find God just in doing mitzvot and keeping kosher and observing Shabbos. Where do we find God? The prophet Elijah was desperate, and he was anxious, and he was manicky, and he was upset, and he's out wandering. And what does God say to Elijah? Go stand at a mountaintop, and behold, I'll pass by you in a great strong wind, but I won't be in the wind. And then there'll be an earthquake, and the earth will rumble, and rocks will fall, and I won't be in the earthquake and in the noise and the tumults. And then there will be fires raging and passions, and I won't be in the fire. Where does God say he'll meet Elijah? In the kol damamad daka, in the still, quiet voice when he goes into his inner chamber and he starts to listen. That's where we believe as Jews that we find the divine. That's where we find the divine in ourselves, and that's where we'll find the divine in the world. And it's hard. It's incredibly hard. In this day and age, we're losing moments of quiet, right? All of that technology bombarding us, and I'm a technophile, and I'm not giving it up, and I love it. But what's happening right now across the country is a lot of people are waking up to the consequences of too much technology. You know, they have internet rescue camps in Taiwan and in other places in the world where they take teenagers away from the internet because they're addicted. They have addictions. So they remove them to places, to spaces without any technology to rehabilitate them. There's a new phenomenon happening around the country called a technology Sabbath. It may happen on a Saturday. I think that's a great time to do it, but it could happen on a Tuesday. It could happen at a nighttime when you have dinner and you turn off your cell phones. We need a technology Shabbat, a technology Sabbath. Otherwise, we become addicted and we can no longer be present to those around us, to the world around us. There's another phenomenon that's happening around the country, or I guess around the world. New types of vacations. Not really new, but certainly poignant. And they're called black hole resorts. I never heard the term, I've known the idea, where you pay, this was in Pico Iyer's article, you pay extraordinary amounts of money, $2,000, $3,000 a night, to go to a luxury resort for the privilege of not having technology. Where we pay thousands of dollars to go to a place so that we can't access our technology. It's great. If you got the money, it sounds like a great vacation, but not all of us can get away to those mountaintop resorts. So we need to create a mikdash, a place, a space, a sanctuary in our lives. Maybe the sanctuary is this sanctuary, and I hope it functions as such. Maybe the sanctuary is a special place in our home or an office. I love my office. Or maybe it's in our car. Maybe it happens not in big ways, but in little ways. Maybe it happens when we're sitting in traffic, or when we're sitting at a restaurant waiting for a friend to arrive, or when we're changing a diaper, or when we're out on the jogging trail. It can happen anywhere, everywhere. We read in Exodus, Asuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. Make for me a place, a space, a moment in your life, and I will dwell, God says, within you. I will dwell within you if you make room for me. That's what we do as Jews, or we're supposed to do as Jews, to make room for other in our lives, to make room for God in our lives. And I'm going to end with this, the Shema. It's not coincidental that the Shema begins with shh, and Shalom, peace, begins with shh, and the word sheket, quiet, begins with shh. Hebrew is a primal sound, a primal language. It taps into primal sounds. Of course, shalom has to be a shh, a mother comforting her infant, a Bubby or Zadie coddling a toddler. What is it? It's a universal response. Whether you're here in America or in England or in Israel, it doesn't matter. What does a parent or a Bubby or Zadie do? Shh. Shh is a magical sound. Shh is built into the entirety of our spiritual practice. So when we say Shema, we're saying listen, Yisrael. Literally, struggle can be turned into Yisharel, a moment of the divine, if we make a place, if we make a space in our lives. Shema Yisrael, right? If you listen, we can create heaven on earth. We can create a moment of sanctuary and solitude in our lives. And if we start chanting shh in the car and at the shul and at home, before dinner, after dinner, whenever you can, to create a moment of shh, we'll start to be more comfortable in the quiet and in the solitude, and we'll start to reclaim a sense of self. Let me end with this. Henry Nouwen, who wrote in Bread for Journey, "Beloved, my favor rests upon you. That's the voice we most need to hear. To hear that voice, however, requires a special effort. It requires solitude and silence and strong determination to listen. And that's what prayer is. And that's what blessings are. And that's what meditation is. And that's what being mindful is all about. It's to listen to the voice that's always calling to us from the silent moments in our lives, calling us beloved. Shema, shalom, sheket, right? Each of these are a moment in our lives to remind us that God is speaking. The question is, are we listening? And are we willing to go into that silent place to truly respond? So with that I say, Shabbat Shalom.